The morning sun barely peeked over the trees when screams broke the peaceful quiet of Pine Valley. James Bennett dropped his wood axe and ran toward the sound, heart pounding like a war drum. People were pointing and shouting near the village square, their faces pale with fear. Connor pushed through the growing crowd, his hands trembling as he gripped his axe, and froze. There, trapped between the water well and Mr. Thompson's storage crates, stood a massive brown bear. Her thick fur was dusty from her journey into the village, and her dark eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape. The air seemed to crackle with tension as the villagers formed an uneasy circle around her, their pitchforks and shovels raised in hesitant defense. "Stay back!" James shouted, waving his arms at the children who had come to gawk. His voice carried authority, but inside he felt the same primal fear that gripped everyone else. "Someone get Emma!" The bear huffed and paced in tight circles, her movements both cautious and desperate. She rose on her hind legs, towering over the crowd, and let out a deep roar that shook the windows of nearby houses. Mothers grabbed their children and pulled them inside, while men tightened their grips on their makeshift weapons. Emma Reed pushed through the crowd, her long braids swinging behind her. As the village's only animal expert, people made way for her without hesitation. She studied the bear carefully, noting the desperation in its movements and the faint signs of nursing cubs. "She's scared," Emma said softly, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Look at her. She's nursing her cubs. They must be somewhere in the forest." As if answering, distant cries echoed from the tree line. The mother bear's head snapped toward the sound, and she pawed desperately at the ground, trying to find a way out. But the villagers had formed a tight circle, and every time she moved toward an escape, someone shouted and waved tools in the air. "She wandered in looking for food," Emma whispered to James, her eyes never leaving the bear. "Now she's trapped and terrified. Bears don't usually come this close unless they're desperate." James nodded, watching as the bear became more agitated. "What should we do? We can't let her charge at anyone." Before Emma could answer, a collective gasp rose from the crowd. A tiny figure had broken free from the circle and was walking directly toward the bear. 2-year-old Mia Johnson, with her curly blonde hair and blue overalls, toddled forward on unsteady legs. In her small hand, she clutched half a honey biscuit. "Mia, no!" James lunged forward but stopped when the bear turned her massive head toward the approaching child. Time seemed to freeze. The mother bear's dark eyes locked onto Mia, and everyone held their breath. No one daring to move for fear of triggering the bear's protective instincts. Mia showed no fear. She simply smiled, her innocent face glowing with curiosity as she extended her small hand with the biscuit. "Bear hungry," she said, in her baby voice, which somehow carried across the silent square. The bear lowered herself to all fours, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air. She took one hesitant step toward Mia, then another. "Don't move," Emma breathed, her heart pounding. "Nobody make a sound." Mia placed the biscuit on the ground and stepped back, her eyes never leaving the bear. Then she did something that made tears spring to Emma's eyes. She sat down cross-legged and patted the dirt beside her, just as she did when inviting her stuffed animals to tea parties. The mother bear stretched her neck, sniffing the biscuit. With one quick movement, she scooped it up and ate it. Then instead of charging or running, she simply watched Mia, her aggressive posture softening ever so slightly. "Bear sad," Mia said, pointing to the forest where the cubs' cries continued. Baby bears crying. The mother bear huffed again, but the sound was different now, almost like a sigh. She looked from Mia to the forest and back again, as though the child's simple words had bridged some ancient gap between human and beast. What happened next would be told in Pine Valley for generations to come. The mother bear slowly lowered herself to the ground, her massive body settling onto the dirt just a few feet from Mia. The crowd collectively held their breath. James gripped the handle of his axe so tightly his knuckles turned white, ready to rush forward if needed. Emma put a restraining hand on his arm, her eyes never leaving the scene before them. "Bear tired," Mia said, her tiny voice somehow cutting through the tension. She patted the ground again, this time more gently. "Bear miss babies." The mother bear made a low rumbling sound deep in her throat. It wasn't aggressive, it sounded almost like pain. Her eyes, deep pools of wilderness intelligence, remained fixed on the child. Somehow, this massive creature seemed to understand that this small human meant no harm. James nudged Michael Hayes, the blacksmith's son, who stood nearby with a pitchfork. "Move those crates. Give her a path out." Without question, Michael and 2 other men hurried to shift the heavy wooden boxes that had been blocking the bear's escape route. They created a wide corridor leading toward the forest edge. The bear watched them work, her massive head turning to follow their movements. When the path was clear, she looked back at Mia one more time. The little girl smiled and waved her hand in a shooing motion. "Bye-bye, bear," she said simply. In a moment that defied every natural law of wild animals and humans, the mother bear dipped her head almost like a nod before turning and ambling toward the forest. She moved unhurriedly with dignity as the villagers stepped back to give her space. No one raised a weapon, no one shouted. They simply watched in awed silence. At the edge of the trees, the bear paused and raised her head, releasing a deep rumbling call. Within moments, 2 small cubs tumbled out from the underbrush, racing to their mother with happy cries. The reunion brought fresh tears to many eyes as the mother nuzzled her babies, checking them over before leading them deeper into the forest. As the bear family disappeared among the trees, the spell over the village square seemed to break. James rushed forward and scooped Mia into his arms, hugging her fiercely. "Don't you ever do that again," he choked out, his voice breaking with emotion. "You nearly stopped my heart, little one." But Mia just giggled and patted his wet cheek. Bear was sad. Bear happy now. Word of what happened spread through Pine Valley like wildfire. By nightfall, every household was talking about little Mia Johnson and the mother bear. Some called it a miracle, others a dangerous, foolish incident that had luckily ended well. But none could deny the power of what they had witnessed. That evening, as Emma helped James put Mia to bed in the small cottage they had shared since his sister, Mia's mother, had passed away during a harsh winter 2 years before, she found herself lingering by the child's bedside. "How did you know the bear wouldn't hurt you?" Emma asked softly, stroking Mia's curls. The little girl yawned and hugged her stuffed rabbit closer. "Bear eyes sad like Daddy's eyes. Just needed help." James, standing in the doorway, turned away quickly, but not before Emma caught the gleam of tears. Since becoming Mia's guardian, James had struggled with grief and the overwhelming responsibility of raising his sister's child alone. There were days when his eyes did indeed hold the same lost, desperate look the bear had shown. 3 days later, while gathering herbs at the forest edge, Emma froze when she heard a rustling in the underbrush. Slowly she turned to face the sound, her heart hammering. There, partially hidden by the trees, stood the mother bear with her cubs. They made no move to approach, simply watching her with intelligent eyes. "Hello again," Emma said softly, remaining perfectly still. The mother bear huffed gently, her cubs playing at her feet. Then, in a gesture that Emma would question for years afterward, the bear nudged one of her cubs forward. The little creature tumbled toward a blackberry bush just a few yards from where Emma stood. With deliberate movements, the cub picked berries from the lower branches, eating some and dropping others on the ground before scampering back to its mother. After they disappeared into the forest, Emma cautiously approached the bush. Beneath it lay a small pile of perfectly ripe blackberries, far more than the cub could have accidentally dropped. When Emma returned to the village and told James what she had seen, he shook his head in disbelief. "Are you saying the bear brought her child to share food with us, to thank us?" Emma placed the berries on the table. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but I know what I saw." That night, a powerful storm hit Pine Valley. Rain pounded the thatched roofs, and wind howled through the village like a living thing. James woke to a crash as a tree branch smashed through his barn roof. Racing outside in the downpour, he worked desperately to move his 2 goats and cow to safety as water poured into the damaged structure. A flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and James froze. There, just beyond the fence line, stood a familiar silhouette, massive, 4-legged, unmistakable. "Go on, get out of here," James shouted, more from instinct than fear. But the bear didn't flee. Instead, she lumbered forward, approaching the damaged barn. James backed away, his heart pounding. Was she taking advantage of the chaos to search for food? Was the momentary peace broken? To his astonishment, the bear positioned herself beneath the largest gap in the roof. Then, with surprising agility, she stood on her hind legs and used her powerful front paws to push a dangling beam back into place. The piece of wood had been hung. James stood transfixed, the rain soaking him to the skin, as the bear dropped back to all fours. She turned her head to look at him directly, their eyes meeting across the yard. Recognition passed between them, not friendship exactly, but something deeper and more ancient, a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild animal. With a soft grunt, the bear turned and melted back into the storm, leaving James questioning everything he thought he knew about the creatures that shared their forest. The next morning, Connor organized a group to repair James's barn properly. As they worked, Mia played nearby, singing to herself and occasionally looking toward the forest with a knowing smile. "Bear helping," she announced suddenly, pointing to the repaired beam. "That's right, little one," Connor said, humoring her. "We're all helping fix Uncle James's barn." But Mia shook her head, her curls bouncing. "Number Big Bear helped nighttime." The men exchanged glances. James had told no one about what he'd witnessed in the storm. "How do you know that, Mia?" Emma asked gently, kneeling beside the child. Mia tapped her chest. "Bear told me here." That afternoon, Michael Hayes reported something strange at the village boundary. Deep paw prints in the mud circled the entire perimeter of Pine Valley, as if something large had walked a protective path around the village during the storm. As summer faded into autumn, the villagers of Pine Valley began to notice changes in the forest around them. Game was more plentiful, easier to hunt. Berry bushes seemed to produce more fruit, and strangely, other predators, the wolves that had sometimes threatened livestock, seemed to have moved to more distant parts of the forest. One crisp October morning, James took Mia mushroom hunting along the safe edges of the forest. As they filled their basket with chanterelles, a shadow fell across the path. James looked up, his heart leaping to his throat. The mother bear stood just 20 feet away, her cubs now noticeably larger than when they'd first seen them. James instinctively pulled Mia behind him but the little girl squirmed free and stepped forward with a happy cry. "Bear friend!" she called out, waving enthusiastically. James tensed, ready to snatch his niece to safety, but the bear made no threatening move. Instead, she watched them calmly, her cubs wrestling playfully nearby. After a moment, she grunted softly and turned away, leading her family deeper into the forest. That night, sitting by the fire in their cottage, James finally asked the question that had been haunting him for months. "Mia, how did you know the bear wouldn't hurt you that day?" The little girl looked up from her wooden toys, her eyes reflecting wisdom far beyond her years. "Same eyes as Mama," she said simply. "In my dreams." James's breath caught in his throat. Since her mother's death, Mia had often spoken of seeing her Mama in dreams, but he had always assumed it was a child's way of coping with loss. Now he wasn't so sure. Winter came early that year, bringing heavy snows and bitter cold that tested the village's resources. Food stores ran low by January, and hunting parties returned with empty hands more often than not. The forest, usually generous, seemed to have gone silent under its white blanket. During the worst blizzard, when winds howled like hungry ghosts and snow piled against doors, someone pounded on James's cottage in the middle of the night. He opened it to find Michael Hayes, his face red with cold and excitement. "Come quick," Michael gasped. "You won't believe what's at the village storehouse." James bundled Mia in thick blankets and carried her through the storm. At the communal storage building, where Pine Valley kept its shared provisions, a small crowd had already gathered despite the late hour and terrible weather. "It started about an hour ago," Emma explained as James approached. "First, just scratching, then heavier noises. Connor thought we were being raided by wolves, or maybe desperate travellers." Connor Adams stood guard at the storehouse door, his face a mask of bewilderment. "See for yourself," he said, stepping aside. James peered into the storehouse and nearly dropped Mia in shock. Piled near the entrance was the largest collection of winter game he had ever seen. Rabbits, pheasants, even a small deer, all freshly killed and carefully placed. Around the bounty, melting into the floorboards, were distinctive wet paw prints. "The bear," James whispered, unable to believe his eyes. "Has to be," Connor confirmed. "No hunter would leave this without a word, and no other animal would stack its kill so deliberately." Mia squirmed in James's arms. "Bear helping," she said sleepily. "Cold winter need food." The meat from the bear's gift kept Pine Valley fed through the worst weeks of winter. By spring, the story had spread to neighbouring villages, though few believed it. How could a wild bear, the very symbol of forest danger, become a guardian to human settlements? When the first green buds appeared on the trees, James took Mia to the stream for her favourite activity, throwing pebbles into the rushing water. As she played, a familiar shape emerged from the tree line upstream. The mother bear looked thinner after the harsh winter, but her coat still shone healthily in the spring sunshine. Her cubs, nearly grown now, splashed playfully in the shallow parts of the stream, catching the season's first fish. "Bear mama," Mia called out happily, waving both arms. James no longer felt fear, only a strange sense of kinship as he watched the bear teaching her young to fish. The mother bear looked up at Mia's call, her intelligent eyes seeming to recognize the child instantly. She huffed softly, almost like a greeting, before returning to her lesson. That evening, as the village gathered for the spring planting celebration, old Mrs. Thompson shuffled to the centre of the circle. Though she rarely spoke at gatherings anymore, Everyone fell silent when she raised her hand. "My grandmother told me a story when I was no bigger than little Mia," she began, her voice wavering but clear. "A story about the spirit bears that watch over those who show kindness to the forest. Once in many generations, they reveal themselves to a pure heart." She fixed her milky eyes on Mia, who sat playing contentedly in James's lap. "That child has her mother's gift. Jessica always could see deeper than most of us." James felt a chill run down his spine at the mention of his sister's name. Jessica had indeed possessed an unusual connection with wild things. Birds that would eat from her hand, deer that didn't flee at her approach. He had almost forgotten. "What are you saying?" he asked carefully. Mrs. Thompson smiled, her wrinkled face crinkling. "I'm saying that Bear recognized something in your Mia, something rare and precious, and now it seems we're under her protection." Summer brought abundant crops and mild weather. The forest seemed more generous than ever, offering berries, mushrooms, and game in quantities the village had never seen. And though children were still forbidden from wandering into the deep woods alone, parents no longer felt the same level of fear they once had. One warm afternoon, as Emma helped James repair his garden fence, she finally voiced the thought that had been growing in her mind for months. "I think you should consider marrying again, James," she said quietly. "Mia needs a mother, and you shouldn't be alone forever." James paused, a nail between his teeth. He studied Emma's face, her kind eyes, the freckles across her nose, the strand of dark hair that had escaped her braid. Something shifted in his heart, like ice breaking in a spring thaw. "Are you offering?" he asked, only half joking. Emma blushed, but held his gaze. "Maybe I am." Before James could respond, Mia's excited voice called from near the forest edge. "Bear! Bear babies!" They rushed to find her standing just beyond the garden, pointing excitedly. There, at the tree line, stood the mother bear with her now adolescent cubs. But something was wrong. One of the cubs limped badly, blood matting the fur on its right hind leg. "It's injured," Emma whispered. "Probably a hunting trap from one of the eastern villages." The mother bear's eyes met James's across the distance. He could almost feel her plea. "She wants our help," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Are you mad?" Connor asked when James explained his intention to treat the wounded cub. "That's still a wild bear, regardless of what's happened this past year. She's trusted us with her children before," James argued, "and we owe her our lives after the winter hunt she provided." In the end, Emma's expertise with animals won the argument. They prepared a clearing near the forest edge with medical supplies and waited, hardly daring to believe the bear would understand. As the sun began to set, shadows emerged from the trees. The mother bear led her injured cub forward, keeping the healthy one back in the forest. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching the humans cautiously. "It's okay," Emma said softly, kneeling on the ground with her supplies laid out. "We want to help." Mia broke away from James's grasp and walked toward the bears, ignoring his desperate whisper to come back. "Fix Bear baby," she said confidently, looking up at the mother bear. "Like Daddy fixed my knee." The mother bear made a rumbling sound deep in her throat. Then, with agonizing slowness, she nudged her injured cub forward toward Emma. The young bear whimpered, but obeyed its mother, limping into the clearing. What followed tested everything Emma knew about treating animals. The wounded cub was frightened and in pain, but the mother bear, kept it calm with soft grunts and occasional gentle cuffs when it tried to flee. Emma worked quickly, removing metal trap fragments from the leg, cleaning the wound, and applying healing salves and bandages. Throughout the procedure, James kept one hand on his knife and the other around Mia, ready to run if the mother bear's patience snapped. But the massive creature watched with an almost human understanding, occasionally pacing but never threatening. When Emma finished, she sat back on her heels, exhausted. "That's all I can do. The leg isn't broken, thank goodness. With time and rest, the cub should heal completely." The mother bear approached her wounded offspring, sniffing the bandages carefully. Then, in a gesture that made tears spring to James's eyes, she turned to Emma and lowered her massive head, gently pressing her forehead against Emma's shoulder for the briefest moment before pulling back. "She's thanking you," James whispered, his voice breaking. Emma could only nod, too overwhelmed to speak. The bears disappeared into the forest, but the bond between them and the village of Pine Valley had been cemented. Over the coming months, villagers occasionally glimpsed the bear family, noting with satisfaction that the injured cub's limp gradually disappeared. By harvest time, James had asked Emma to marry him, and she had accepted. The day before their wedding, he took Mia to visit her mother's grave on the peaceful hillside overlooking the village. "Your mama would be so proud of you," he told the little girl as she carefully placed wildflowers on the simple stone marker. "You've brought something magical to our lives, little one." Mia smiled up at him, her innocent face serious for a moment. "Mama sent the bear," she said with complete conviction, "to watch us." A twig snapped in the nearby trees. James looked up to see 3 bears standing at the forest edge, the mother and her 2 healthy cubs, now nearly as large as she was. They made no move to approach, simply watching the small human family with calm, intelligent eyes. And James raised his hand in greeting, no longer surprised by their appearance at significant moments. The mother bear raised her head, seeming to nod in return before leading her family back into the shadows of the forest. That night, a storyteller from a distant village arrived for the wedding festivities. As the community gathered around the bonfire, he asked if anyone had local tales he might learn and share in his travels. Old Mrs. Thompson pointed to Mia, who was falling asleep in Connor's lap, while the adults enjoyed the celebration. "That child has the best story in the county," she said, "about a mother bear who got trapped in our village and how a baby's kindness changed everything." As the storyteller leaned forward eagerly, James caught Emma's hand in his own. Together, they began to tell the tale that would soon spread throughout the region. A tale of fear transformed into understanding, of a child's innocent compassion bridging the divide between human and wild, and of a mother's love that transcended species. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon hung full above Pine Valley, villagers would hear a distant huffing call from the forest, the mother bear reminding them of her watchful presence. Children no longer feared the sound. Instead, they would smile in their beds, comforted by the knowledge that somewhere in the dark woods, a most unlikely guardian kept them safe. Years passed. Mia grew into a young woman with her mother's gentle ways and her Uncle James's quiet strength. Emma and James had 2 more children, a boy and a girl, who grew up hearing the legend of their sister and the bear. The mother bear grew old, her once dark fur turning silver around her muzzle, but she never wandered far from Pine Valley. On Mia's 18th birthday, she walked alone to the forest edge, drawn by some instinct she couldn't explain. There she found an aged bear, waiting in the shadows, somehow knowing she would come. "Hello, old friend," Mia said softly. no longer the toddler who had fearlessly approached a frightened animal, but still carrying that same pure heart. The bear huffed softly in greeting. Then with deliberate care, she placed something on the ground between them, a perfect honeycomb, golden and dripping with sweetness, a gift from one mother's daughter to another. Mia smiled through her tears. Some bonds once formed never truly break, not even those between a wild bear and the child who once offered kindness when everyone else offered fear. As Mia carried the honeycomb back to the village, whispers seemed to follow her through the trees, not threatening, but watchful. The forest had always spoken to her in ways she couldn't explain to others, even to James and Emma. It was as though she could feel the pulse of life beneath the soil, the silent communication between ancient trees, the memories stored in stone and stream. The village had changed in the 18 years since that fateful day. Pine Valley had grown prosperous, its reputation for unusually abundant harvests and strangely peaceful relations with the forest drawing new settlers and visitors. The small collection of cottages had expanded into a thriving community with a proper schoolhouse where Emma now taught the village children about plants and animals. Connor Adams had become mayor after old Mayor Thompson had passed 5 winters ago. His first act had been to establish the Forest Protection Decree, forbidding overhunting and requiring that for every tree cut, 2 saplings must be planted. Though some had grumbled about the restrictions, no one could deny that since the bear incident years ago, respecting the forest had brought nothing but prosperity to Pine Valley. "There's the birthday girl," Michael Hayes called out as Mia entered the village square. Now the community's master blacksmith, following his father's retirement, Michael had grown into a powerfully built man with kind eyes. He had made no secret of his admiration for Mia in recent years, though she had gently kept him at a friendly distance. "Where did you wander off to this time?" he asked, falling into step beside her. His eyes widened at the golden honeycomb in her hands. "That's the most perfect comb I've ever seen. Where did you find it?" Mia smiled, but didn't answer directly. Though the story of the mother bear was well known in Pine Valley, her continued connection with the aging creature remained largely her own secret. "The forest provides for those who respect it," she said instead, the phrase a common saying in the village now. Michael looked at her curiously. "You know, sometimes I think you're more forest than village, Mia Johnson." "Is that such a bad thing?" she asked, her blue eyes reflecting the afternoon light. "Not bad at all," Michael replied softly. "Just rare." The village had prepared a magnificent celebration for Mia's 18th birthday. Tables laden with food filled the square, and lanterns hung from every post in preparation for the evening festivities. Children ran about with flower garlands, and musicians tuned their instruments near the newly built dance floor. James met her at the edge of the square, his once youthful face now lined with the responsibilities of fatherhood and village leadership. As head of the Pine Valley Council, he had become known for his wisdom and fairness, qualities he often credited Mia with teaching him. "There you are," he said, embracing her. Emma was starting to worry. His eyes fell to the honeycomb, and something knowing passed across his face. "An old friend," Mia nodded. "She remembers." James squeezed her shoulder. "Of course she does. Some things change a soul forever." Before Mia could respond, 2 small whirlwinds crashed into her legs, her 10-year-old brother Noah and 8-year-old sister Emma. "Auntie Mia, Uncle Connor says we can't have cake until you come," Emma complained, her dark braids bouncing as she tugged at Mia's skirt. And Grandma Thompson wants to tell your bear story again, Noah added, rolling his eyes though he had heard the tale hundreds of times. The children of Pine Valley never tired of the legend of the baby and the bear. Then we mustn't keep them waiting. Mia laughed, allowing herself to be pulled toward the celebration. As twilight fell and lanterns glowed against the darkening sky, the village gathered to honour their most cherished daughter. Old Mrs. Thompson, now nearly 100 years old and bent like an ancient tree root, sat in the place of honour beside Mia. Though her eyes had clouded with age and her hearing had faded, her mind remained as sharp as ever. Tonight marks not just a birthday, Connor announced to the gathered crowd, but a reminder of the day that changed Pine Valley forever. 18 years ago, a frightened bear and a fearless child taught us that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the most unexpected sources. The villagers raised their cups in a toast as Connor continued. Mia Johnson, you've been our village's blessing. May your 18th year bring you as much joy as you've brought us. Music and dancing followed the feast, with Mia being passed from partner to partner, as was the village tradition for coming-of-age celebrations. As the night grew later, she found herself in need of quiet and slipped away from the revelry, heading toward the small pond at the edge of the village. There, beneath a willow tree, she found an unexpected visitor, a traveller she had noticed earlier sitting quietly at the back of the celebration. He was older than her, perhaps 30, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. His clothes marked him as someone who had journeyed far, sturdy leather boots worn from miles of walking, a pack that had weathered many storms. "I'm sorry," he said, rising quickly when he noticed her approach. "I didn't mean to intrude on your celebration." "You're not intruding," Mia assured him. "Sometimes festivities can become overwhelming, even when they're in your honour." The stranger nodded, understanding in his gaze. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Ethan Marshall." "The scholar from the Eastern College?" Mia asked, recognition dawning. "Yes, though I found myself more interested in your village's stories," Ethan admitted. "Particularly yours." Mia sat on a stone bench near the water's edge, smoothing her celebration dress. "My story has grown with each telling. I suspect villages love their legends, but at its core, it's true," Ethan said. Not a question, but a statement. "You were that baby who approached the bear." "I was," Mia confirmed, though I remember it only in flashes, more feeling than clear memory. Ethan hesitated, then asked, "May I sit with you a moment?" "There's something I'd like to ask you." Mia nodded, curious about this scholarly stranger who seemed different from the usual travellers seeking Pine Valley's prosperity secrets. "I've been studying something," Ethan began, carefully sitting beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. "Across the northern regions, there are stories, old stories that predate our grandparents' grandparents, about certain people who can commune with the forest and its creatures. People born with a special connection to the natural world." Mia kept her expression neutral, though her heart quickened. No one had ever spoken so directly about the things she felt but could not explain. "The Eastern College calls them forest speakers," Ethan continued. "The ancient texts describe them as bridges between human settlements and the wilderness, people who can understand the needs of both worlds and help them exist in harmony." "And you think I'm one of these forest speakers?" Mia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "I think the evidence suggests it strongly. Your village has prospered remarkably since your encounter with the bear. Your forest remains healthy while others are depleted. Even the weather patterns here seem more favorable than in surrounding regions. He gestured toward the celebration in the distance, and I've watched how the villagers look at you, not just with affection, but with a kind of reverence, as though they sense something special about you, even if they don't have the words for it. Mia was silent for a long moment, watching the reflection of the moon rippling on the pond's surface. Finally, she said, "I've never told anyone this, but I can feel things in the forest. It's like hearing a conversation just beyond the range of understanding, except sometimes I do understand." The admission, spoken aloud for the first time, felt both frightening and freeing. "The words are flowing now that the dam has broken," she continued. "The old mother bear, we still have a connection. She's taught me things about the forest, and sometimes when I walk among the trees, I know exactly which plants will heal, which fruits are safe to eat, where the game will be plentiful." "Just as the ancient texts describe," Ethan said softly, excitement and wonder mingling in his voice. "Mia, there are others like you. Not many, perhaps one born in a generation, but they exist. The college has been trying to find them, to learn from them, to understand this rare gift." "Why?" Mia asked, suddenly wary. "What would they do with such knowledge?" "To preserve it," Ethan explained. "We live in changing times. Many forests are being cleared for expanding settlements. The old ways of living in balance with nature are being forgotten. The college believes that forest speakers may be our last hope for teaching people how to exist alongside the wilderness without destroying it." A rustle in the nearby bushes interrupted their conversation. Mia wasn't startled. She had sensed the presence approaching even before the sound revealed it. A large greying bear emerged from the shadows, her movements slow with age, but still powerful. Ethan tensed instinctively, drawing back, but Mia placed a calming hand on his arm. "It's all right," she said quietly. "She's just curious about you." The mother bear stopped several yards away, studying the stranger with intelligent eyes that reflected the moonlight. After a moment, she huffed softly and settled onto her haunches, watching them with what could only be described as patience. "This is the same bear from your story," Ethan whispered, amazement evident in his voice. Mia nodded. "She's old now. Her cubs have cubs of their own, but she still watches over Pine Valley, over me." The bear made a low rumbling sound in her throat, almost like speech. Without thinking, Mia responded with a similar sound, the vocalization coming naturally to her. Ethan's eyes widened. "You can communicate with her." "Not with words," Mia explained, "but in feelings, intentions. She understands more than you might expect, and I've learned to understand her too." She smiled slightly. "She thinks you smell like distant places and old paper." The mother bear rose and approached closer, each movement deliberate. When she was just a few feet away, she extended her massive head toward Ethan, sniffing the air around him. "Don't move," Mia advised. "She's deciding whether you're trustworthy." "And if she decides I'm not?" Ethan asked, remarkably calm, despite the proximity of the enormous predator. "Then our conversation would end rather abruptly," Mia said, with unexpected humour. "But I don't think that will happen. She trusts my judgment, and I've sensed no danger from you." After what seemed an eternity, the bear huffed again and backed away, returning to her position at the edge of the clearing. Ethan released a breath he hadn't realised he was holding. "That was extraordinary," he said. "In all my research, I've never witnessed such interaction firsthand." Mia's attention had shifted to the bear, whose posture had changed subtly. "She's trying to tell me something," she murmured, rising from the bench. "Something's wrong." The mother bear turned her head toward the forest, making a series of urgent sounds. Mia stepped closer, concentrating on the feelings flowing between them: concern, warning, a sense of approaching trouble. "What is it?" Ethan asked, watching this silent communication with fascination. "I'm not sure yet," Mia replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But something's coming. Something that threatens the forest." As if in confirmation, a distant sound reached them. The rumble of heavy wagons approaching from the eastern road, unusual at this late hour. The mother bear growled softly, her aging body tensing with protective instinct. "Timber merchants," Mia whispered, the knowledge coming to her with certainty, though she couldn't explain how she knew. "They've been cutting in the eastern forests, and now they've set their sights on ours." Ethan's expression hardened. "The Blackwood Company. They must be. They've been clearing forests across 3 counties, using royal permissions that many believe were obtained through bribery." The bear rose up on her hind legs briefly, her full height impressive despite her age, then dropped back down with a decisive huff. With one last meaningful look at Mia, she melted back into the forest shadows. "She's going to gather her family," Mia said, understanding the bear's intention. "They'll watch these strangers but won't reveal themselves unless necessary." Ethan looked at her with new respect and urgency. "Mia, this may be exactly why I was meant to find you. The college has been fighting the Blackwood Company's expansion, gathering evidence of their corrupt practices and the damage they've done. But we need more than documents and testimonies. We need to show people a different way forward." He took her hands impulsively. "Come with me to the college. Help us protect not just your forest, but forests everywhere. Your gift, your connection to the